Today is a day of gratitude, and there's a lot to be thankful for and a lot to celebrate. I know there's a lot that can fill the mental real estate of our minds, but I'm hoping today to just take a couple minutes to talk about giving thanks. It's a day in Canada that's designated to gratitude and thanksgiving, which is pretty amazing. And you might not know the story, but historians believe that the first Thanksgiving was in Canada, occurred in 1578. And Martin Frobisher, his fleet made it to Newfoundland, and in celebration that they had arrived safely, that the ocean didn't swallow them up, and the fact that God had delivered them, they celebrated Thanksgiving. And the Queen the Queen of England appointed a man by the name of Maester Wolfel. And Maester Wolfel, on the first day that they landed, one of the first things that they did was they gathered in a church service like this, not in a building like this, because we're talking about 1578 landing first in Canada, right? But they gathered together and they had a small little service and they celebrated communion for the first time. That was the first Thanksgiving in Canada. And here we are, 450 years later. We are celebrating once again. We are celebrating. We sang today and we celebrated who God is in our life and the fact that God has also provided for us. And gratitude, it's this incredible thing because it's a universal experience. It's not one person that's experienced gratitude in the world. It's something that we've all experienced, being grateful for something. Somebody's given us something, or the Canucks might finally win, or that was like aspiring gratitude, right? But when good things happen, there's like this instinctive or intuitive, almost automatic response to be grateful. And some people, they're like, thank goodness, right? Thank goodness. They don't know who to celebrate. At Centerpoint Church, we celebrate that God has provided these things. And so we say, thank God. Thank God for the fact that we can meet freely in a place like this and we can sing. Thank God that we can be part of bringing free clothes to families that need help. And thank God that we can have breath in our lungs today. Thank God that this morning I had breakfast with the team and we get to sit down and just do life together. Like, there is so much to be grateful for. And gratitude is something that we choose to express. We can always have this feeling of gratefulness and thankfulness, but gratitude is a choice to express what is happening within you. It's not something that is always comes natural to us, but it is something that we choose. We choose to be grateful. It acknowledges the deposit of good in our life and that something good has happened to us or somebody has done something incredible to us. This is where gratitude flows from. Unfortunately, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but not expressing gratitude also communicates something. It communicates ingratitude. And usually we don't purposefully try not to communicate. I don't think anyone goes throughout their life like, you know what, I want people to know that I'm not grateful for them, right? I don't think anybody thinks like that. Maybe there are some people in the world, but for the most part, I think what happens is we just forget. We forget to open our mouth. We forget to write it down. We forget to express our gratitude. And that's why week after week, we open with singing at Centerpoint Church, because it's a pouring out of gratitude. God, thank you for your love. God, thank you that for thousands of years, you have continued to love and care and direct your people. Like, there's so much there that we express our gratitude in. But we can easily fall into the habit of just not expressing. And as much as helping people, like criticism and critique can help, and we believe that it's helpful for people, it's amazing how much further words of encouragement goes. I know in my life, I'm a words of affirmation person. Any others in the room today? You don't want to admit it, but it's you, okay? If it's you. And it's something that goes a long way in my life, and I know so many others. And so today matters, and here's why today matters. Because somebody who interacts with a lot of different people in the week, it's really easy to go week by week and hear about how much politics isn't changing, how much the economy isn't changing, how much relational challenges there are in the world. And it's easy to focus on those things. And we can almost fall like prey to this, right? Because it almost seems like it's our natural bent to just like focus on these as if it's somehow going to produce some sort of change. And I have yet to experience intense joy in my life by pointing out all the things that need to change around me. But it's amazing, and Jesus is going to unpack this for us today, that as we look at Jesus' life and his ministry, that joy is attached to his gratefulness and his thanksgiving. And as he teaches those around him also to express gratitude, how much joy is experienced. In today's story, we're going to be looking at Jesus feeding a large amount of people. It's the feeding of 5,000. That's a lot of people to feed. It's a lot of people for us to feed today with modern technology and all of that. It's a whole nother thing for Jesus to feed 5,000 people 2,000 years ago. And so we find ourselves in this story where Jesus is preaching and he's teaching and people want to listen to what he has to say. There's something different about Jesus. He seems to be kind. He seems to be almost unkind to those who are unkind to people who are trying to figure out their faith. He doesn't like the religious leaders who make themselves better than everyone else around them. And I don't know if that's a fear tactic. I don't know if that's just a power move. Whatever it is, Jesus seems to be harsh towards them, but kind towards people that feel like they're misfits or feel like they're outsiders. And Jesus just seems to be attracted or drawn to those people who seem to be on the fringes. And so large crowds come, not just because Jesus seems to meet with these people, but also because he has something to say about the culture. There's something different that seems to be happening in Jesus' life, and he seems to be providing a way to God that other people just simply couldn't provide. There's something attractional about Jesus, something irresistible about Jesus, and so people are flocking to him. And along with all these people that are flocking to hear Jesus' message are these 12 disciples who are misfits. They're a motley crew of people that are from all different walks of life. And what I find so fascinating about these disciples is they want to give the Son of God advice about how to do ministry. You know, like, I'm not going to go and try and give advice to somebody that's in logistics. For one, I'm not a detail-oriented person, so they don't really want my advice. Secondly, I know nothing about logistics. So for me to go in there and give advice would be ridiculous. And so this is how I feel often about the disciples as they're giving advice to Jesus about how he should be doing ministry. But what's really difficult and challenging when people choose to follow Jesus, even today as we choose to follow Jesus, is Jesus seems to bring people to places that they don't necessarily want to go or come up with solutions that nobody else saw. And so today, in the feeding of 5,000, Jesus brings a solution that none of the disciples were thinking about, that seemed impossible. And yet our God is a God of impossibilities. And it's easier for those of you that are brand new to the faith, you're trying to figure this out. There's a moment where you may realize that Jesus is who he says he is, and your horizons look brighter, and there's something incredible that takes place there. And it's an incredible moment when we choose to follow Jesus, especially early in our faith. The more that we track in our faith, the more that we're going to grow, the more stubborn we become to believe God for big things. And there's something wrapped up in this story that is so beautiful because it supersedes people's expectations. And I hope, Centerpoint Church, that God supersedes ours. And so Jesus is talking to his disciples. They're going to present him with a problem, and Jesus is going to come up with a solution that nobody saw coming. And that's because he's the only one that could do this. So we're going to pick up in Luke. Luke is a doctor. He's very detail-oriented. He's very interested in the miracles of Jesus, so especially like physical healing. But then also he's interested in things like today, the multiplication of food, which many of us are like, if you're new to the faith, you're like, what does that mean? We're going to unpack that for you today. But Luke, in his detail-oriented mind, is going to help us, and we're jumping into chapter 9 as we hear the story of Jesus feeding a large amount of people. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging because we are in a remote place here. This sounds reasonable. I think any of us would be like, you know what? Yeah, Jesus, it's midday. It's going to be getting dark soon. And so we don't have a lot of food here. So why don't we just send them out? They're giving advice to Jesus on what should happen next. Logistically, it makes sense. Maybe it was some of the tax collectors that chose to follow Jesus, that he gave an invitation to follow him, and they're like, you know what, this just makes sense numerically. We can't feed them, and so let's be prudent with their time. Let's honor their time, and let's send them away. And this is Jesus' response to their great advice. This is what he says: you give them something to eat. And they're all like, hold on. And this is where we miss it. When we've read stories like this, if you've been in the faith for a long time and you read stories like this, you miss this. They've all left their jobs. Matthew, tax collector. He made a lot of money. He leaves it to follow Jesus. There's no money in following Jesus. Peter, James, fishermen. They put down their nets to follow Jesus. They got nothing. When Jesus says, you give them something to eat, they're like, we've already given what we have. Jesus, we're in faith. What? Give them something to eat? Yeah. Give them something to eat. Of which they would say, we don't have much, and that's where they go next. They answer, we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. I mean, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd, come on, Jesus. None of us work here. Help us out. And there's something underlying here in the story, because Jesus is about to reveal something to his disciples and those that are sitting there today, or sitting there then. He's going to reveal that he is the one that is able to bring about change. He's the one that's able to bring that which is dead back to life. He's the one that's able to multiply what little we bring before him. And I've been in ministry for full-time, vocationally, for 20 years. A few years in there, I didn't get paid. We were launching a church. And so I know what it feels like to sit in the gap between where God is calling you to go and what he's asking you to do, and not knowing what's going to come next. I know that faith journey, and I know how tough and how challenging that is. But it's amazing to me, over 20 years, how many times people have stepped out with very little and God has done very much. How many times that people serve on a Sunday morning. Like today, there's people serving in all of our kids' classrooms. There's guest services welcoming you at the front door. And they were all smiling and they look great today. Anybody with me? They were like ready to go. Can we celebrate our guest services? Yeah, they were great. And how that front door experience can be a game changer more than even a message on the platform. Because when you drive up to a church for a first time and your heart's racing a little bit and you're wondering, well, how weird are these Christians, right? When you're pulling up, oh, no, not us. Yeah, right. What brand, what offshoot, what's going to happen this morning? Where do we even sing? Where do we even hear stuff? Like you come and a friendly face meets you. It's amazing how many times even that first impression can change somebody's life. You see, it's in the small details. It's in the willingness to offer. It's not about how much you have, but how much you're willing to give. And even if it's a little, I feel like my whole ministry has been marked by little. God, I'm just willing. I'm human. I'm here. Would you use me? And over, he's like, yeah, I can use you, Josh. I mean, and if God can use me, he can use anybody. I'm saying that for real. I feel like my life is like the fish and the loaves. And over again, I see people come and sacrifice and give. And it's not always out of abundance, and it's not always out of convenience, but it's amazing how often God shows up in those moments, because it's not about how much we give. It's about what God is able to do through what it is that we lay down. But he says to his disciples in response to this, he says, have them sit down. Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. And then he continues. And then he takes the loaves and he takes the 2 fish. He looks up to heaven And something happens between the taking of the little and what happens next. There's something in between, and I don't want us to miss this today. And he gives thanks, and he breaks them. And then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. What happens after this is the bread multiplies, and the 5,000 are fed from these loaves and these fish. Everyone's full, and then there's 12 baskets left over to overwhelming. That Jesus, through his power, feeds all these people. But between that end miracle and the giving of the fish, there's something in between that we can't miss. And it's so subtle and it's so small that I think most of us, we just skip over this part in the story. But there's two forms of prayer. You can boil all prayer down to two categories. One is thanksgiving and one is requests. That's it. I mean, you can try and recategorize them, but that's basically the two categories they fall into. But in between, Jesus does this. He gives thanks. And this is a significant word. And it's the word, and I practiced my Greek a few times this week, so forgive me for those of you who are Greek in the room. Eucharisto, okay? I did pretty good there. I didn't say the CH. But this word, it means thanksgiving. And when Jesus gives thanks, he uses this Greek word. And it's gratitude on the lips of Jesus. And what this word means is it means I have seen the grace and the favor of God. I give thanks because I have seen God's favor towards me. He took the bread and he knew it was a gift from God and he gave thanks. Eucharisto. But it holds within it a derivative. It holds the Greek word, and you'll see in the middle it's the word charis, which means grace, but it holds the word chara, which is the Greek word for joy. And if we're going to try and find lasting joy, and we've kind of changed this word, and we've changed it to the word happiness. Everyone's searching for happiness. Everyone's searching for fulfillment and for purpose. We're searching for joy. In the Greek word, it connects it to the word grace, which is connected to the word thanksgiving. That our thanksgiving is connected to our joy. It's not in things outside. This is an important point. It's not connected to what's around us. It's connected to grace. Joy is a derivative of grace. It's connected to grace, and grace has a name. And the name of grace is a person. It's Jesus. And it's a foretelling. Jesus is saying, as he uses this, I give thanks, this Eucharisto word, that I see what has been given to me as grace of God, and it leads to joy. Chara means joy. Charis is grace, and you'll see this word right in the middle of Eucharisto. Charis is grace, and Eucharisto envelops all of it in thanksgiving. Jesus remembers in this moment, not just to move on to the miracle, but to look up and to say, God, thank you for the very few things that we've been given that we're able to multiply. Jesus paused to give thanks, and so too, for those who are followers of Jesus, it's not an optional thing. All throughout Jesus' ministry, he stops to give thanks to God, to pause and to give thanks. And this isn't the only moment. And one of the brilliant writing techniques of Luke is that Luke shares this story of Jesus multiplying the bread to 5,000, and then at the end of Jesus' life, the night before he passes away, and he gives his life as a ransom for many, he gives his life, he dies, and he rises again. On the night before that, he's sitting at a table with his closest followers. He's sitting at a table with those, one who is going to betray him, but 11 who will eventually desert him because they don't know that he's about to give his life. He's told them so many times, but they just don't seem to get it. And so they're gonna move away. But Jesus, in the middle of that dinner, on the meal called the Passover, he breaks bread again. And Luke again uses the same sentence. This is what happens later on in Luke, on the night before Jesus dies. He said, and he took the bread. Here we see it exactly the same. He gave thanks. And here's why I want to pause. How does Jesus give thanks on the night before he dies? I mean, is he like, God, thank you, I'm about to die? That doesn't sound great. I mean, he knows his termination date. I mean, think about that. Not many of us know the place and the time. Jesus did. And yet he sits at a table. And regardless of what might come ahead, regardless of what has happened, he gives thanks. And it's so obvious. And yet, how often do we just keep moving? We wish things were different. We wish there had been change. We wish they had better outcomes, or we wish something had taken place, or we hope that somebody had got something right. On and on and on it goes. Reasons to not pause and give thanks. But here Jesus, on the night before he dies, he takes the bread. He gives thanks. He breaks it, and he gives it to them. And this word, again, is Eucharisto. He uses this word to remember and to give thanks, not for the difficult things that are coming ahead, but the fact that God is with him. Ultimately, Jesus is going to see his body broken and his life poured out. And so this is what he's displaying. He's foreshadowing that my body is going to be broken and my life is going to be poured out for you. And so you might have grown up in a tradition like the Catholic tradition where you hear the word Eucharist. Another word for it is the Lord's Supper, or you hear the word communion. And really what this word Eucharisto means is what Eucharist comes from, or communion or Lord's Supper comes from. And what it means is to give thanks. It's to give thanks. In the same way that Jesus gave thanks and he broke the bread and he poured out his life, he wants us to do the same, to remember that his body was broken and his life was poured out for us. And communion, the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, is a chance for us to pause and to give thanks. And so today, as you came in, you grabbed one of the communion elements. And if you didn't, there will be an usher in just a few minutes that's going to pass those out. But what this is a chance for us to pause and to say, thank you, Jesus, that you gave your life. Thank you that your body was broken and you were poured out for us. In the same way that 450 years ago, on the eastern shores of Newfoundland, they sat and they thanked God for rescuing them. And again, they remembered in the breaking of the bread and the drinking of the wine or the juice that Jesus, his life was broken, his body was broken, and his life poured out. And Eucharist, it might sound like a big, fancy, big Christian word that we go, oh, what does that all mean? Some of you might not know what that meant years growing up. But what it simply means is this, is to give thanks. Thank you, Jesus, for paying a price that I couldn't. Thank you for the breath in my lungs. Thank you that you gave me new life. Thank you that you called me a child of yours. Thank you that I'm forgiven for what I've done wrong. And communion is a great expression of thanks. And so today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to take the Eucharist, we're going to take the Lord's Supper, we're going to take the communion elements. And simply what it means is to give thanks. God, thank you for what you've done. In the same way that Jesus broke the bread and gave thanks to God before he died and in front of that crowd, in the same way, we are going to give thanks today. And we're going to say, thank you, Jesus, for the price that you've paid, remembering his body that was broken for us and his life that was poured out for us. On Thanksgiving, let's not spend another day trying to figure out all the ways that we can correct somebody in our world. Okay, that's not what today is about. What today is about is to pause and to remember what is good. I was at the clothing drive this week, free clothing store. I don't know what it ended up being called, free clothing store. And Mimi was at this table. She's one of our amazing volunteers here. She's sitting at the table. And then she, I think, was helping fill some of the racks. And so families were coming. There was a giveaway basket there. And so I thought, somebody should probably sit there. So I sat down, And so I started interacting with some of the families. And I had a really great time. Similar today with my moments with John, my jokes didn't land at all. It was one of those days off, And so Roger was standing beside me, another one of our guest services person. He's like, you need to stop the jokes. I'm like, okay, I'll stop the joke. But I'm sitting there, and it's always helpful to have a friend that'll just tell you, dude, your jokes suck. It's just helpful. So I'm sitting at this table, and this lady comes up, and she's with her daughter, and they've just shot for a bunch of stuff to come up to the table. And I've asked a few questions. I said, hey, how'd you hear about the event? And then, did you find everything you needed? And so she's like, yes, we found new rain boots for myself and then my daughter. But my husband, he goes to work every day in the rain. We've gone to local thrift stores. The prices keep going up. We can't find his size. I just wish we could find a pair of working rain boots for him. And I'm sitting at this table, and I'm like, what are the chances that in one of these random boxes we might have some rain boots? And it's a kids' free clothing store, not an adult one, so sizing might be off. But I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go check. And I'm going to the back, and just before I get around the table, I turn around and I say, what size is he? She's like, 11. So, and you probably see where this story's going. So I go to the back, and Connor's standing there. And I said, I'm just looking for potentially rain boots size 11. I said, I just looked through this box. Why don't you look in this box? And I look in the box, and there they are. Rain boots, steel toes. And I'm like, what size are these? 11. I'm sitting behind this pipe and drape, trying to pull myself together. Because there's been many moments where God isn't so obvious. And you need these moments where you experience him and gratitude just pours out. And so I'm like, I can't wait to give her these boots. But I got to pull myself together because nobody wants soggy rain boots like on the inside, right? So I go back. I'm like, Connor and I are crying behind the pipe and drape, having our little moment, which is good. I go back to the table and I hand her the boots. And she just said, like, you guys are my heroes. And I'm like, well, and I didn't have any great words. As a preacher or an orator, you really want great words in that moment. I had nothing. And I said, yeah. I'm totally undone. And I just said, here's the boots. She cries. I'm trying to hold it in. She said, I'm so thankful you did this. And I thought about these loaves and these fish and all those families that were fed. And I'm just so grateful in that moment for a pair of size 11 rain boots. There's so much, church, to be grateful for. I know there's things politically we want different, I'm sure. There's things in the world, there's unrest around the globe. Economically, it's challenging, it's difficult for many people. But today I want to pause to remember that above it all is a God in heaven that sees it all, who sees the mother of one whose husband is going to work in wet shoes and just wants to give him rain boots. He sees the needs of your life and my life. He saw our overarching need for a Savior, salvation, and for forgiveness. And in light of that said, I'm going to send my best gift to you in the person of Jesus. And so today, we pause to remember that Jesus was the greatest gift poured out for you and poured out for me. His body broken, his life poured out, that we might have life. And so today, let's pause and remember. So team, I want to invite you to come up, music team. And if you didn't get a communion cup, if you did, you can pull that out right now. but we're going to take a few moments to just remember. If you are here for the first time, or you're not in a place where you're like, I'm not so sure about following Jesus and all of that, I just want to say there's zero pressure to participate. And we say, you know what, you don't have to participate in this moment. You can sing the words or sit and engage in the song we're about to sing. But for those of you that have chosen to follow Jesus and taken that step, this is a moment for us to remember. And so if you do need something, just lift up your hand and we'll get you a communion cup. But right now I want to ask you to stand to your feet. And I'm going to pray. And as we're singing, there's no set time that I'm going to come up and ask you to take the bread or to take the juice today, which symbolizes Jesus' body broken, is a symbol of his life poured out for us as we drink the juice. There's no set time, but just take a moment to remind yourself of what Jesus has done, that he paid a price we could not. And when you're ready, to take the bread and to receive the juice as a remembrance of what Jesus has done in our life. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing, and you can receive that when you're ready. God, we thank you for today. We thank you that you sent your son Jesus as the ultimate gift for us. God, that you care for the overarching need for forgiveness of sin, that you care about, God, restoring relationship with you. And you care about those little moments in our life, God. The moments like rain boots. The moments like with Ahmad, getting a hat and a sweater. The moment where, God, we thought, who are we to come back to church or to know the living God, and yet you welcomed us. We don't deserve all that, God, but you freely give it. And so, God, we recognize your grace. It's your favor to us, that you so loved us that you sent Jesus. And we thank you that you sent your son, who paid a price for us, that we might have life. So, God, as we take these elements, as we remember, God, that you sent your son, whose body was broken, and his life was poured out for us, that we are eternally grateful. Thank you that you loved us. Thank you that you came for us. We celebrate that today. Amen. And when you're ready, you can receive that as we sing.